This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? New York edition. Mark?
What the hell is going on is we're a week out from the New York election, and Zoran Mamdani looks like he's headed to Gracie Mansion, and he is a democratic socialist. He's running on the Democratic he's running on the Democratic Party ticket, but he is a democratic socialist, which is the radical left-wing party of AOC and Bernie Sanders and all the and many other fellow travelers of global communism. And so we have on today Jamie Kirchick, who's a great writer who's done a deep dive into what democratic socialism actually is. What is this party to which Zoran Mamdani is attached mean? What does it mean for the Democratic Party in the future? What does it mean for New York? What does it mean for our country?
Yeah, nothing good. That's what you're all gonna hear. Not that that's a big surprise to our listeners, but this really, I know that people are going to make the argument that what happens in New York stays in New York, and we talk about that in our interview. And they're going to make the argument that New York does not look like the rest of America, which is certainly true. I can attest to that. But at the same time, I think there is a troubling and persuasive argument to be made that the strategy of the Democratic Socialists of America that Jamie has researched and laid out and lays out for us in very, very fine detail is actually going to be one that can work. When we look at a system like the one in the UK, a parliamentary system, you have this shift in parties. Sure, there's the Labour Party and there's the Tories. But you see that there's actually scope for other parties to exist. There's the Greens, there's the Scottish Nationalists, and there's the Reform Party, which is now polling number one because of the fine performance of both the Tories and the Conservatives. Or you look like at a parliamentary system like Israel's, which is constantly barfing up new political parties endlessly. There is no political party that is operative today that was operative in 1948. So, they change, they constantly rename themselves. It's like Halloween every freaking day in Israeli politics. In our system, the ability to take over a party is far more limited. Our parties are much more established. Our parties are backed up by both a constitutional system, but also a financial system that advantages the people who are already in the business. But I think that we have not thought enough or spoken enough about the potential takeover of our parties. People say Donald Trump owns the Republican Party now, and I think that's right. But I think that Zoran Mamdani has a good shot, not for president, obviously, because he's a foreigner, but a good shot at having he and his cohort take over the Democratic Party. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole long history of this in both parties. I mean, going back to the 70s when Ronald Reagan and the conservative movement, the Republican Party was the party of the East Coast elites. And it was liberal. Club. It was a liberal party. It actually was,
a small L liberal, but yes.
Small L, yeah. But it was the party of John Lindsay and the Rockefellers and all the rest of that. And the Ronald Reagan and the conservative movement and Bill Buckley and National Review led an internal coup, essentially, where they took over the party and they made it remade it in the image of Ronald Reagan and the conservative movement. And then you've had more populist wing, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, which has done something similar with the rise of Donald Trump. So there's a long history, and this exists in both parties, of, it's not like the UK where you can just go off and you can form your own party, but third parties don't tend to succeed in this country because of our system. So what you do is you take over the party that's most closely affiliated with you, and you bring the energy and you bring the voters in, and you do it. And I think that the Democratic Socialists are trying to do that and are succeeding in doing that in the Democratic Party. I mean, if you just look at the cycle of the last 3 elections where, Donald Trump won the presidency and then the Democrats got it back. And what happened? They governed far to the left because this is where their base is. This is where their energy is. And, the Democratic base is, driven largely by a combination of far left socialism and anti-Semitism. And those two forces in the Democratic Party on the left literally are incarnate in Zoran Mamdani. He's literally the confluence of all the forces of the far left base of the Democratic Party becoming incarnate in a single person who is now about to win the mayoralty. And I think that's going to energize them, and it's going to inspire them to continue their takeover until the host is dead and they've become they've taken over its body and are pushing it.
Right. And I know some people who, particularly folks in the center, but also, sort of never Trumpers and others who are listening to Mark are kind of saying to themselves, no, that's not true. We need a party in the center. Americans are fundamentally there. And the Democratic Party, can be that party, blah, 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 blah. And there are some Democrats who still sort of represent that part of the party, not many. That's for damn sure, but there are some. The problem is where the momentum is at this time. And this is really what has persuaded me. It's not that I believe that Americans are fundamentally down with this radical lefty Islamist lunacy, sort of Greta Thunbergism.
They're not.
Right. But what matters a lot, especially in the Democratic Party, and you can like it or hate it, the Republican Party has become much more of a mass movement. The Democratic Party is an elite movement. And this is the problem. Even though, your steel workers in PA and your auto workers in Michigan are either going to be MAGA Republicans or they're going to be solid, good old school Union Democrats who aren't down with the Mamdani agenda, they don't matter to the Democratic Party at all anymore. The Democratic Party is owned by the administrators of Harvard University, the administrators of the city of New York, the administrators of the city of San Francisco, and the crime-ridden city of Oakland, and Portland. Yay! These are their models. These are their guiding lights. And all you need to do is look at who matters in Democratic politics, right? That to say this wing, the normal people wing of the Democratic Party, is not going to win this fight. And that is my biggest fear.
Well, the evidence of it is the Biden presidency.
Yeah.
So I mean, Trump comes in and Biden wins back the White House, and and promises I'm a uniter. I bring people together. That's what I did on Capitol Hill and all the rest of it. And just because they happen to flip 2 seats in Georgia and take a majority in the Senate and have unified control of government, they went nuts with far left policies. They had, they opened the borders and let millions of people in, and they, tried to pass the American Rescue Plan, which we're now shutting down the government over the last vestiges of the COVID subsidies that they put out there. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is 86% COVID was 86% climate spending, had nothing to do with inflation. And they went on a spending spree, and they set the world on fire in their foreign policy. And it was a 4-year left-wing dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And Trump, so much so that Trump came back into office. And so you would think they would look at that and say, what did we do wrong? Self.
I said,
self. I said, I was thinking to myself, what did I do wrong the last time around? Maybe we should be more rational when it comes to immigration, because apparently 90% of Americans want to kick out all the people with criminal records. No. Let's go storm ICE facilities.
Yeah.
Let's go to El Salvador and sit down and embrace an alleged MS-13 wife-beating gangbanger. Let's double down on stupid. right?
By the way, Mark means Chris Van Hollen, who
Yeah.
used to be a member of the normal wing of the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
and who is now the senator from Maryland, who probably prays to Zohran Mamdani every night, because I don't know what the
Exactly.
hell's happened to him.
Yeah,
So
so I mean,
that's the direction.
they're not behaving rationally.
They're not speaking to themselves.
And so exactly, they're not saying self. We need to figure out what the hell's going on here.
Exactly.
And so I see no evidence that the Democratic Party has learned the lessons of its twin defeats to Donald Trump and is
Yeah.
course correcting in any way, shape, or form. And now you've got Mamdani in New York, who's energizing them, who's got
Woohoo!
everybody excited,
He's
and
giving them a
they're going
tingle
to,
down
and,
their
and when he
legs.
wins, they're going to say, "This is the future. We got it. This is our base. This is how we do. This is how we win elections." And it's like, no. Well, you know what? When you run in Michigan or in Arizona or Georgia, you're not going to be running in a state where you can win with a plurality against a disgraced former mayor who was almost impeached over sexual harassment charges and killed everybody's grandparents during the COVID pandemic. That is not going to be recreated for you in these swing states. But they don't care, because it's not about rationality. It's about ideological purity.
And there you have it. So you came here to listen to our great guest, and you're going to love his contribution. We call him Jamie, but of course his name is James Kirchick. He is just a terrific journalist, an outstanding writer. He's the New York Times best-selling author of a book I found a great deal of fun, I confess to everybody, Secret City, The Hidden History of Gay Washington, and a book called The End of Europe, Dictators, Demagogues, and the Coming Dark Age. Little did he know, is all I can say. He's a contributing opinion writer to the New York Times. He's a writer at large for Airmail and a contributor to something called the Axel Springer Global Reporters Project, which is actually really cool. He's reported.
Is it pronounced Springer?
Yes, it is. In German. So ist es, Mark. Und man muss Deutsch sprechen, wenn man kann.
Oh, good Lord.
So there we go. Folks, here's our interview.
Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. You have this fantastic piece in the Wall Street Journal. Has Mamdani really left his political home? Tell us what his political home is, what it stands for, and what it means about who he really is.
Yes, the Democratic Socialists of America was founded in 1982 by a man named Michael Harrington. Michael Harrington was a very famous socialist, very concerned with the issues of poverty. And while an opponent of the Vietnam War and an opponent of many American Cold War policies, was at the same time a very resolute anti-communist, as socialists really should be, because if they know their history, they know that when communists come to power, it's usually the socialists who get put up against the wall first. And that was what Michael Harrington and his comrades in the DSA understood. That's what they believed. The party was largely dormant for decades until 2016, when Bernie Sanders ran for president. Although not a member of the DSA, he identifies himself as a democratic socialist, kind of small d, small s, democratic socialist. And so this sort of brought in a lot of new interest in the party. And it would grow over the years as opposition to Trump on the left made the left more radical in many ways, to the point where really within just a few years, it has now 100,000 members. It had to be 5,000 members in 2016. Now it has 100,000 members. But most of those people, or the real hardcore activists who came into the party, were very different types of socialists than Michael Harrington. In fact, many of them were just outright communists. Very, very far left, hardcore. At best, I would say they're sort of indifferent to communism, or, as I described Mamdani himself, a fellow traveler of communism. And so if you look at the party's platform, they had a platform drafted in 2021, which really is essentially a communist platform. I mean, it calls for the nationalization of all industries. It calls for the abolition of private property. It calls for the abolition of prisons. It calls for the abolition of police. It calls for giving the vote to non-citizens. It's this really far-left utopian platform. And on foreign policy, it's even crazier. They want to normalize relations with Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. And last year, it's important to note, just 2 months ago, at its last convention, the party withdrew a clause that had been in their charter since Michael Harrington founded the party that prevented authoritarian leftists from joining, right? So any Stalinist or Maoist or communist, if you were a member of any sort of organization that fell under those ideologies, you were not allowed in the party until August. So they really are, I think it's fair to say, a fellow traveling communist party. I think the most reprehensible thing that they've done in recent years was immediately after October 7th, the New York City chapter endorsed a rally in Times Square where the events of October 7th were lauded and cheered on. And multiple chapters of the DSA around the country released statements supporting October 7th, okay? And my contention in the piece is Zohran Mamdani has done really next to nothing to distance himself from this organization. And if this was a right-wing politician, let's say it was a far-right politician who was a member of a quasi-fascist political party who won the Republican primary for, say, DA of Staten Island, okay, something like that. And let's say this far-right party supported, Viktor Orban and putting women who have abortions in prison and outlawing homosexuality, all these crazy far-right equivalents of what the DSA stands for. I think that candidate and that party that he is a member of would be receiving a hell of a lot more scrutiny than Zohran Mamdani and the DSA are.
Well, Jamie, kudos for this piece, because there's been a bunch written about the DSA, and I remember Michael Harrington even from the olden days when he wasn't, dead. But what I really liked about it was that it contextualized the concerns about the mayoral campaign of Zohran Mamdani, because, Bernie Sanders, to a lot of us, looks like a crank, right? Yes, of course, he did extraordinarily well in the primaries, and he might even have ultimately been the candidate had, evil mainstream Democrats and men in smoke-filled rooms not hobbled him. But I still think that people think of Bernie Sanders as a fringe figure. Zohran Mamdani is not just not a fringe figure. New York is our financial capital. New York is the place that Al-Qaeda, that Osama bin Laden thought would be the most important American symbol to attack. And this guy fits very neatly within the context of everything you've explained about DSA. And, you use lines in this terrific piece in which you explain why the Globalize the Intifada calls that Mamdani has made are they don't stand alone. And I think that that's critically important. Could you, for our listeners, sort of try and bring these threads together? Because I think that I like the headline, and I liked what it has Mamdani really left his, quote, political home? Because I think that's right. This is a home, and it's important to understand what that house looks like.
Well, this is something that I'm frankly astonished more Democrats aren't concerned about, because the DSA is very explicit in their manifesto, in their party platform. They call for the creation of a new political party, of the DSA becoming an official political party. This is important to clarify. They're not a political party in the strict legal sense of the term, right? They are not subject to FEC laws. They're a nonprofit activist organization right now. But the goal is, they are very explicit. The goal is to basically use the Democratic Party as a means of increasing their prominence, their visibility, using the Democratic Party line to get their candidates elected, which they've done. There's about 250 elected DSA members across the country. Zohran Mamdani will obviously be the most high profile, should he win, which I think he, is certainly bound to win next week. And so I don't understand why. Well, I should say one more thing. So what they're doing, what the DSA is doing, is a practice called entryism. And it's sort of an obscure term, which I'll explain. It's basically the process by which far left, often communist individuals will infiltrate a more mainstream organization with the long-term intent of taking it over, right? And this happened a lot in America, or there were lots of attempts to do this in America in the early years of the Cold War, or even earlier during the 1930s with the labor movement. Ronald Reagan had to fight the communists in the Screen Actors Guild in the 1940s and 1950s. So there was a lot of this back then. It's happened more recently in Britain. In the 1980s, there was a faction called the Militant Tendency that was trying to overtake the Labour Party from within, and they were actually described by Neil Kinnock, who was the Labour leader whom Joe Biden plagiarized. Neil Kinnock referred to them as a maggot within the body of the Labour Party. The movement behind Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party because a lot of non-Labour members joined up, because the rules for how the Labour Party leader was elected were very liberalized, and it made it very easy for people to just join the party for £5 and vote for this guy. And that's what the DSA is trying to do right now with the Democratic Party. They're using this technique of entryism to infiltrate the party, but not to really take it over. It's basically they know that they can't win seats as a third party. They know that the structures of the American political system make third party candidates. It's a very difficult prospect, right? So they're very open about using and exploiting the Democratic Party. They have a parasitic relationship on the Democratic Party. They want to suck it dry, and then when they've done that, create their own party, which they see, and I think it's kind of a cockamamie idea, they see the DSA one day becoming the party of the left of center in America to basically challenge the Republicans. But they're very open about this, and I don't understand why more Democrats can't look at this and say the DSA are not our friends. They're very open. They hate the Democratic Party. They call the Democratic Party this corporate-owned, neoliberal, imperialist. They use all these kinds of Marxist terms to describe the Democratic Party. And the Democrats, I think, for a variety of reasons that we can speculate, have just decided to basically lay supine and allow this to happen. And maybe they see the DSA as being allies, and it's this kind of popular front, no enemies to the left kind of political strategy that they're waging against Donald Trump. And I think that's another reason to not like Donald Trump, is that he is encouraging a lot of this behavior on the left. I don't think he's intentionally doing it, but the way he acts, the way he talks, I think it puts in the mind of liberals that we have to ally with anyone on the left to defeat this greater evil on the right. And so I'm very worried. I see a kind of Weimar dynamic happening now in American politics, where each side is sort of encouraging and radicalizing the other. And I think that is the impact that Zohran Mamdani is going to have.
So, I mean, why would they try and parasitically kill the Democratic Party instead of just coming in and taking over the host, and then like those bugs you see where the parasite comes in and then they eat away its brain and the parasite keeps the bug. It's why kill the host? Just take it over. I mean, isn't that really the bigger danger?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that they're frankly deliberately vague in their intentions. But all I know is that if you look at their manifesto, I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up. They're very clear that the Democratic Party is a sellout party of corporate-owned shills, and that we want to start a new party, but not yet. Right? The political timing isn't, the contradictions haven't been inflated enough. They haven't been heightened enough for us to launch our moment. So it's kind of a deliberately vague strategy, but certainly in the short term. Their short-term goal is to make inroads into the Democratic Party and to use the Democratic Party line in state and local offices to get their people elected.
Oh, that's why he's running as a Democrat.
Yes, absolutely.
He's taken over. He's taken over the host and is. So what is the impact if Mamdani wins? Which it seems that as we record this a week out from Election Day or so, that it looks like he's probably going to. That we don't know that for sure. How does this play out after Mamdani win nationally?
I think you mean locally first and then
locally and then nationally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, locally, I think you'll see a spike in crime, a large spike in crime, and not just a temporary one, because the police are going to know that they don't have the mayor at their back. They know that if they get involved in situations with violent criminals, that the mayor might come after them. I think you will see an increase in anti-Semitic hate crime because Mamdani, in my opinion, is an anti-Semite, and certainly all the anti-Semites in New York are voting for this guy. Okay, like the guys up at Columbia who shut down Columbia, the people who are protesting the Nova Music Festival exhibition, if you can imagine people protesting that in New York, that whole kind of riffraff, like the professional activist riffraff that shuts down bridges and streets and whatnot, that is basically his paramilitary. Those people are all voting for him. They're going to feel emboldened, so I think you will see life for Jews, people who are visibly Jewish, being difficult. I think Jewish organizations and institutions are going to have difficulty because he's going to use the powers of the city against any institution that identifies as a Zionist institution. I think you will see economic decline to the extent that he can implement any of his kind of far-fetched ideas. Raising taxes is very difficult because that's apparently he needs to get approval from Albany to do that, and it's unclear whether or not the Democrats up there will go along with those ideas. But opening up these government-run grocery stores is going to put a lot of mom and pop bodegas out of business. If you have government funded, if they're undercutting the market price because the government's supporting them, that's going to happen. Nationally, I'm of two minds. It could either be that what happens in New York stays in New York and that it really doesn't have any kind of effect nationwide, that Democrats throughout the country are going to want to distance themselves from him and say, look, that's New York City, I'm here in Kentucky or whatever, and we don't like those kinds of ideas anyway. Or people could look at the excitement that he's generating, the support that he's generating, and want a piece of it. And I think the fact that you have someone like Hakeem Jeffries, after months of dilly-dallying and refusing to endorse Mamdani, did so. He caved last Friday and did so. That's an important sign, I think. Chuck Schumer hasn't done it yet, and I'm not sure if he will, frankly, because I do think that the Israel anti-Semitism issue is too important for him to.
That means
make
they
an
own him,
endorsement.
right? They own him now. I mean, now that Hakeem
They own
Jeffries,
him. Oh, absolutely.
everything Mamdani does,
Yep.
the Democratic National Party owns him.
No, he's a blessing to the Republicans nationwide. Absolutely.
I want to talk about the Jews and Mamdani. You've talked about him as an anti-Semite. Obviously, I agree with you completely. He clearly is an anti-Semite, and his parents are also anti-Semites. Now, not everybody adopts the views of one's parents, but of course, he is not just an anti-Semite, but an elitely brought up anti-Semite.
He has explicitly said that his parents basically informed and taught him his political views. So I think it's entirely fair to visit the sins of the parents upon the son. In the same way that I visited the sins of Chesa Boudin. He was the communist DA in San Francisco who was the son of two terrorists, and then he was raised by two other terrorists when his birth parents were put in jail for an act of terrorism with the Weathermen. He's very explicit about him learning from his parents. And so when an individual is very open and clear about the role that their parents played in their political ideology and their political awakening and whatnot, I think it's entirely fair to draw connections between what the parents say or believe and what the kid does.
So Fox News had a very good deep dive into the Mamdani cash machine and where he was getting his money. And it brought together one of my favorite Americans, Linda Sarsour,
Yes.
who is another one I would not like to meet in a dark alley at night wearing my Magen David, as well as George Soros. I wouldn't mind meeting him in an ally because I think I can take him. But
Well, he's like 98. I sure
that's
hope
why,
you can.
That's why I could take it. I have low
It's
standards.
not fair.
Yes. A database of 110 groups that back Mamdani, including a lot of them that are labeled as either Muslim or socialists. CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations Action, the Islamic Circle of North America, Muslim Action Coalition, Yemeni American Merchants Association, Bangladeshi American Advocacy Group, and then these super Northern Virginia sketchy things like the Sterling Charitable Gift Fund, which was raided by the FBI as part of an investigation into Palestinian terrorist groups, but ended up actually surviving. So this is who he is, and this is not a new thing. This is not an October 7th thing. That's what's so interesting, right? There are a lot of nut jobs in what you described as, his sort of militia for coming out of Columbia and NYU but those people have no idea what river or what sea we're talking about.
He knows what river and what sea.
Mamdani knows what river and what sea, and he was a founder of his university, Students for Justice in Palestine. So can you just do a little bit more of a deeper dive into where he comes from and who he is and what he's about and why he hates the Jews.
Well, he's very much of a type, a kind of global cosmopolitan type. So he comes from, upper middle class upbringing. I'm not sure what caste his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, what sort of, well, he's Muslim. His mother, Hindu, Mira Nair, filmmaker. I'm not sure what caste she was. I'm sure she was from a high caste, if not Brahmin herself. Born in Uganda, as there was a large, Indian expatriate population there that goes back to the British Empire. Interestingly, his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, the Columbia professor, was expelled from the country along with tens of thousands of other Indians by Idi Amin in the early 1970s. And Mamdani's senior has just written a book that I would recommend everyone read the review of it in the journal by Tunku Varadarajan, in which apparently Mamdani Sr. defends Idi Amin. And he defends the expulsion of the Indians, of which he was one, a victim of, on the grounds that this was an anti-imperialist action, because the Indians were themselves British colonial subjects. So that's kind of heinous. And Mahmoud Mamdani also was one of the very few people I ever came across in the West who was a defender of Robert Mugabe's violent seizure of white-owned farmland in Zimbabwe in the early 2000s, which cast that country into real famine for years. So that's the father, and that's really what, he really is a leading light of post-colonial studies, a major disciple of Edward Said. And so Mamdani Jr. was born into this, again, very leftist, kind of cosmopolitan, citizen of nowhere type background, milieu in Uganda. The family moves to South Africa when he's a young boy, and then they move to America, I believe, when he's 7. His father gets a teaching post at Columbia, and one of the reasons I think you can tell that Mamdani is really not textbook smart, at least, is that he applied to Columbia as the son of a very well-known Columbia professor and did not get in. Okay, that is extremely rare, to be the progeny of a very well-regarded Ivy League professor and apply to attend that school and not get in.
And the theory is?
Well, I just think he's not that smart. I think he's charismatic and he can give a great speech. I don't think he's actually a very smart individual. And it's interesting to note also that when he was a low IQ individual, that when he was applying to Columbia, he marked off on the application that he was African American, which is smart in a way. It's devious and clever in a way, in that he obviously was trying to play the game of American racial politics. He could argue that technically he is an African American, having been born in Africa and then becoming a citizen. Obviously, that's hokum. Everyone knows what African American means in the college admissions process. So he's a very savvy kind of player within these sort of elite spaces. And he's doing that a lot now in the campaign. He's had multiple incidents where he'll cry Islamophobia. Someone will attack him for, not condemning Hamas or supporting this, or not condemning Globalize the Intifada, or campaigning with an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, and he'll have this tearful press conference where he talks about how terrible Islamophobia is. And most recently he said how awful it was that, his aunt, she was so scared after 9/11 that she couldn't ride the subway in her hijab, which brings to mind Norm Macdonald's famous joke, wouldn't it be terrible if a bomb went off and killed 50, if Al-Qaeda bombed an American city and killed 50 million people? Just imagine the blowback for all the peaceful Muslims. And that's basically what he's doing. And I just find it sad and disturbing that less than 25 years after 9/11, the very city that was attacked that day would be electing someone who we can say is at the very least sympathetic to the men who drove those planes into those towers. I mean, everything he says in terms of the sins of American foreign policy, how America is a colonialist exploiter, all that sort of rhetoric from Osama bin Laden, which is echoed by the post-colonial left in the West. He is very much on board with that. And I think it's very troubling that a man like this could become the mayor of America's greatest city.
So this is something that fascinates me, and which is this merger between radical socialism and radical Islam. right, which seem to be not natural bed partners, right?
The
So
red market's called the Red-Green Alliance.
the red green alliance. There you go. So there was, Danny and I have the same Instagram algorithm and we send each other the same reels all the time. But there was just one that I just saw where there was a march. I think it was in London, and these masked Islamic marchers running by, and there's a guy, a leftist, on the sidelines with a megaphone chanting, "We're on the same side," and they're yelling at him, "No, we're not."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They hate the American leftists, and they're pro-gay, all the that. And Mamdani seems to be this merger of these two ideologies in one human being that are contradictory. Which one is he more loyal to, and what does that mean?
Well, basically, during the Cold War, you're right. Communism, the left, which is secular, atheist, was at odds with religious conservatism, with Islam in particular. I mean, look at who our allies were in Afghanistan fighting the Soviets, right? It was Islamic rebels, and certainly in Central Asia, which were part of the Soviet Union, you had a lot of opposition to the communist rule because it was atheistic and because it was very suppressive of religious elements. But once the Cold War ends, the left is kind of casting about for a new group to replace the proletariat. And some of them, mostly in Europe, settle on the Ummah, the global community of Muslims. That's going to be the new proletariat. And this is the development of the Red-Green Alliance. You see it most acutely in France and particularly in Britain, where the Labour Party now has a huge Muslim extremist base. And I think that is the reason why France and Britain came out in support of the Palestinian state. I don't think it had anything to do with the interests,
100%.
the diplomatic interests of Britain. I don't think they were giving that any
really
consideration. It was a sop to their base, right, to kind of get these people off their backs. Now, the American left had been largely resistant to this. Not anymore. I mean, Mamdani is basically the apotheosis of this. He is really the kind of, apex of these two ideas merging together. I believe that he at base is a leftist, but I don't think he's secular. And I think I think basically he sees Muslims as like bodies, right? This is where the vote's going to come from. Because we leftist intellectual DSA types, there's not that many of us. We're the vanguard, okay, to use another Leninist term. We are the intellectual vanguard of this movement, but we need the masses behind us. And, the white working class, forget that. They're gone. We can't do that. We can't get that. And you saw that in Europe, right? The white working class now, it votes for Marine Le Pen. It votes for the AfD in Germany. It votes for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party in the UK. So where's the left going to get its base of voters? It's going to come from Muslims. And I think that's, at least look, that doesn't work nationwide because there aren't that many Muslims nationwide. But there are a lot in New York. There's apparently 1 million in New York. And so I think that's what he's up to. I think is that he's ultimately a far left progressive communist fellow traveler with a deep sympathy for Islam. And it's why these leftist intellectuals have always been fascinated by Islam. You can go back to Foucault during the Iranian Revolution, is that they see Islam as a revolutionary force against the West, right? They see it as the force that can destroy the West. And I think similarly, Mamdani and his comrades in the DSA, they see these terrorist groups, these resistance groups in the Middle East as basically being anti-Western and as the spear that can kind of attack America and Israel.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So I was about to continue on this theme, but I have to stop for 1 second because honestly, I don't know whether you've seen these great AI Cuomo ads, right, with Jews for Mamdani, and they can't pronounce his name, but this is not AI. Transgender rabbis for Zohran Mamdani, as yeah, it should be. So John Levine put it up. He said he tweeted, I was thinking this couldn't possibly get worse. Wait for their surprise. And it's a bunch of trans women rabbis, and an actual one. As somebody else said, it sounded like a Saturday Night Live routine, but this is actually sort of the apotheosis of New York Jewish insanity, is the trans rabbis. So I had to have that tiny commercial break for New York being full of insane people, especially Jews. And I can say that, she said, wearing her
Yes.
Magen David and ready to beat up somebody. But what I wanted to follow up on was
Old
your
man.
was George Soros. What I wanted to follow up on was your analysis of the Red Green Alliance, because I completely agree with you about not just Colin, not just Keir Starmer, but also Anthony Albanese. I mean, in my lovely Australia, 800,000 Muslims, 100,000 Jews, and of course, Albo is voting with his feet, and you can see it. What was really interesting was to read in The Guardian, one of my absolute favorite publications for its great integrity and outstanding reporting, is this piece about, which was headlined, "From Scapegoats to City Hall, How New York Muslims Built Power and Shaped Zohran Mamdani." I know, Jamie, that you will be pleased to know that the contemporary national security state was born atop the vestiges of Muslim civil rights. 24 years later, the situation in New York appears completely different. But this article basically dives into the 1 million Muslims in New York, the role that they are playing, the particular role played by the Muslim Democratic Club of New York, which is headed by this guy named Ali Najmi, who's a lawyer who specializes in election law, and this other really, really awesome guy named Khader El Yatim, who's a Palestinian American Lutheran pastor and Democrat Socialist of America. The question for you is a little bit of a sort of a what if, and sorry, I'm blathering on because I love this topic. The demographics don't look the same, right? They don't look the same as in the UK. They don't look the same as in France. They don't look the same as in Australia or in Sweden or in the Netherlands or a lot of Europe, unfortunately. But they do look the same as in Dearborn, Michigan, potentially in New York and elsewhere. And the way that Jews are headed, if you've read Elliot Abrams' great book about intermarriage and about the number of intermarried couples, now 75% of Jews who marry out, and how many of them bring up their children as Jews. And I'm willing to bet that the number for Muslims is much lower in terms of intermarriage. Aren't we headed in the same direction? Boy, that was a really long lead up to a very short question.
Yes, I do think we're headed in that direction, unfortunately. I think we need to have, look, that's something for the Jewish community to grapple with, obviously. That's not something that the U.S. government can do. It's not something that immigration policy is going to be able to fix. That's up to the Jewish community to address that. But I do think that we can advocate for more restrictive immigration policies. I wrote a piece a couple months ago when all these student activists were being arrested. Foreign-born student activists were being arrested for engaging in political activism, whether it was speech or not, was debatable. But for instance, Mahmoud Khalil, the guy up in Colombia, this was before the news of his immigration form seat became public. And I wrote a piece saying, look, as a free speech absolutist, I don't think that anyone in this country should be, criminally penalized for their constitutionally protected speech. And that applies to non-citizens, by the way. They have constitutional rights here as well. But that doesn't mean we have to let these people into the country in the first place. And, being allowed, getting to come to the United States, whether as a tourist or on a visa or becoming a citizen, is a privilege, okay? And there are lots of people around the world, deserving people, I would say, who are in line for that privilege. Why do we allow so many of the rotten ones into our country? Why is Mehdi Hassan a citizen of the United States? How did he get citizenship? Am I allowed to say, as an American citizen, I don't think most Americans would want someone like Mehdi Hassan becoming a citizen of this country. He clearly hates this country, hates his values, is clearly here acting as a subversion agent of foreign ideologies and foreign powers. And we need to do a better job screening the people who come into this country. They're finally starting to do it in Germany. They have a question on the immigration form: do you believe in the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state? In the Netherlands, they show immigrants, pictures of men holding hands and saying this is a value that we have in our country, is that gay people have equal rights. Does this make you sick? Do you oppose it? I think we need to start doing that far more strenuously in terms of who we allow into our country, who we give the great privilege of being an American.
Well, and it's a huge problem on our campuses because the people who are selecting the candidates as the admissions committee of Harvard University and Columbia are running our immigration policy.
And they should not have the right to do that. They can choose, look, they can extend acceptance to someone from overseas, but the ultimate decision of whether or not that person is allowed to come to the United States has to lie with the federal government. With the people.
But even if it's in the hands of the federal government, they're effectively making the decision because it's who they admit that gets to apply for a visa for a student visa. If you don't get into Harvard and you don't get into Columbia, then you don't get to apply for a student visa for them. So I mean, I agree with you 1,000% that this is just a huge problem.
And what was disturbing, I saw this on Twitter. I don't know if it's true, but it doesn't surprise me, is that Mamdani is like twice as popular among foreign-born citizens in New York City than Cuomo, okay? And to me, that is a sign of a failure to assimilate. Because Mamdani he's not really an American. He has citizenship. But what he stands for, he's basically a combination of a Latin American left-wing populist, a Middle Eastern, demagogue, like a demagogic politician in Egypt, and a little bit of kind of like third worldist, like Indian Congress Party, kind of like, that's what he is. Like, he's not like an organic American political tradition that he's representing. He's not, as I said, Michael Harrington, that was like a real authentic American socialism. Mamdani is not that. He's not American in that sense of the term. It's a very third worldist agenda that he has and how he's presenting himself. And people voting for him, I'm sorry, they've not really assimilated to our values if you're voting for him. If you were born in a different country and you've been living in America as a citizen and you're voting for this guy, that to me is a failure to assimilate.
So, okay, again, the election hasn't happened. We don't know. Mark had a great piece. What did you say? Was it vote for the scumbag, vote for the douchebag, vote for the sleazeball?
Yeah.
Vote for the sleazeball. It's important. Just like in 91 against Win Edwards against David Duke. Yep.
Right. Now, and yet, I want to sort of end. We've talked a lot about the stuff that Mark and I really like to talk about a lot, which is our broken immigration system, anti-Semitism, the bankruptcy of the DSA. But let's come back to the Democratic Party and the endorsements that we really didn't talk about. So we've got our chômeur, Chuck Schumer. Everybody, I can remind you that a chômeur is a guardian, and Chuck Schumer likes to refer to himself as a guardian of American Jewry because, of course, he is the senior most Jewish official in the U.S. government. Yeah, thanks. I would like to find somebody else. But anyway, so Chuck Schumer hasn't endorsed him, but everybody else has. And in fact, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, not only endorsed him finally, but also went out and campaigned for him last weekend. And of course, Hakeem Jeffries has as well. I think that their strategy about the Democratic Party is a good one, and I think it's working. And I think there are very few people in the Democratic Party under the age of 50 who are interested in repudiating the Mamdani strain of the party, which is important and big, and it contains that youth element that MTV and Rock the Vote always talked about, that vanishing one that never comes to vote, but in this case may well come to vote because he excites them. He lights them up. So why does this not become the Democratic Party? You said it was the best thing ever to happen to Republicans. Republicans have our own scumbags and sleazeballs, of course. And yes, I do mean you, Tucker Carlson. But isn't this the takeover? Doesn't it actually happen?
It could happen, but I don't think it's going to be successful for them. Because as we've seen, look, this is a center-right country, and Americans are, I would say, significantly more accepting of like right-wing wackadoodle politics than they are left-wing wackadoodle politics. And we have evidence for that in the fact that Donald Trump is our president and has been our president earlier for 4 years. So that's just the reality, I think. I can understand why Kathy Hochul's doing this. She's facing a left-wing, I think her lieutenant governor is running against her for governor from the left. So she's trying to solidify some left-wing support by endorsing Mamdani. Whether or not he'll reciprocate in the governor's race, who knows? But I can't. I really just, maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm right. I hope I'm right that this doesn't. What's happening in New York in Mamdani does not play well outside of New York City, and I think the polls show that. And if you look at, I mean, the Justice Democrats, which are like these, it's like the Bernie type left, squad left pack, right? And they support left-wing primary candidates, often to take out more moderate ones. They have never flipped a Republican seat. Never. The moderate Democrats, like the third way people, they have their own path. I think it's called Third Way Action or something. They've, in just the past 4 or 5 cycles, they've flipped 50 Republican seats, okay? So if you're a Democrat, and I just believe this, I believe that you win from the center. You win from the center left. You can win, Mamdani can win in New York, okay? And AOC can take out Joe Crowley, and that can happen in deep blue urban areas. I just don't see it. It hasn't worked anywhere else.
I want to follow up on this quick question. I often hearken back to this, and Mark has heard me say it 1,000 times. Some time ago, we had our colleague Rui Teixeira on when we were talking about, campus demonstrations in the context of something else. And I asked him, do you think that the youth of today are going to be like the youth of the Vietnam War? These are people who all eventually grew up, right? These are people who became Republicans. And not all of them. Some became college professors and Harvard administrators, but a lot of them grew up. And he said, no, I don't think so. I think intersectionality means that a lot of these people actually are never going to grow up. And that is what makes me question the polling data that shows that even Republicans under a certain age and the vast mass of Democrats under a certain age are violently anti-Israel and more pro-Hamas suggests to me that people will think this is actually a good direction for their party to go in. What do you think?
That's a good question.
I think
and
so.
I don't
You
know,
don't have an answer.
And it's a very depressing one. I would distinguish. Obviously there are a lot of Republicans under 30 who are anti-Israel. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're pro-Hamas. That is true on the left. The youth under 30 are pro-Hamas. It's more an ambivalence, I would say, on the right. But it's not. It doesn't manifest itself in support for the other side. But no, I do. I think we have a generation, a coming generation of people. I'm an older millennial, so we're looking here at Gen Z and the younger millennials, whose minds have been poisoned by a set of really, really bad ideas, from right to left. And I know your colleague Jonah Goldberg wrote a very good book about this a couple years ago, about this kind of collectivist sentiment that is growing on the left and the right. And I think it's going to be a real struggle. And the worst case scenario is a very bad one, in which we have the worst left that we could have and the worst right that we could have.
Danny and I are foreign policy geeks, of course, and
Yeah.
so you always, you have the rational actor theory of international relations, which a rational actor wouldn't do that. And then what you find is that lots of people don't behave like rational actors, right? So you're laying out the rational actor theory for the Democratic Party, which is, this works in New York, but it's not going to work in swing states and all the rest of that. But they also don't behave as rational actors because they lost to Donald Trump in 2016. And then they come back and they win back the White House in 2020. They lost to him on the issue primarily of illegal immigration, and they unleashed the worst border crisis in American history, right? And they go left instead of governing from the center and uniting the party. They won on going to the center, uniting the party, and they governed left, were a disaster, and they ushered in the return of Donald Trump, right? So the rational actor theory doesn't seem to be working. I think that the Mamdani wins and AOC and Bernie and this progressive wing look at that and say, this is where the energy is. We need more untested left wing candidates like Zoran all over the country to energize our base and win at that.
But do you think those candidates win? They might, but do you think that those candidates would win?
No. I think
right.
I think you're right. It's the best thing that ever happened to the Republican Party.
Yes.
But it's terrible for the country because we need to have two sane parties.
I agree, but so maybe they'll go through a couple cycles of this, like the Democrats did in the 1980s. Although this is going to be a lot worse than the Democrats in the 1980s. Okay, like Michael Dukakis was, a saint. He was Reagan compared to these people. But it might go through a couple cycles where they just, are totally cast out of power. Even worse, because the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress until 1994. I think you could see, if they do go down this direction, I think you really could see total Republican dominance. The White House, both houses of Congress, states, governorships, all that stuff. Because I just don't
Certainly
think it
after
has
the
much
2030
purchase.
census, because
Yes.
Zorhan wins. Lots of money is going to leave. Money votes with its feet.
Right.
Lots of people are going to leave
Right.
New York. They're going to go to
Yeah.
Florida. They're going to go to Texas, and they're going to
Yeah.
take their congressional seats and electoral votes with them. And the blue
Yeah.
wall is going to be gone after 2030.
Yeah. That's
So I mean,
strong possibility. Yeah.
yeah. Hey,
Well, the
Richard.
important thing is that we end on a depressing note. We had Dan Senor on last week, and he was like, "Damn, you guys are really depressing." So yeah, and
Well,
I
if you're
think
a
I can
Republican, not
see.
so depressing, because what we've discovered is that we're heading into an era of Republican dominance. So if you're a
Yeah,
Republican
that's what
listener, you're happy. If you're
bullshit. We are not headed into a period of Republican dominance. I have heard that from every damn leader, no matter what party they are. Oh, yeah, we're headed into a period of fill in the blank dominance,
Yeah.
including our beloved Karl Rove, who believed that when George W. Bush was president. And yes, I do miss George W. Bush, but we are not headed
Me
into
too.
a period of Republican dominance, in
don't know about
my humble opinion. You, Mark, and I will have ample time to discuss that.
Yes,
but
we will.
Jamie, you are doing the Lord's work, and I'm sorry we depressed you. But you deserved it because you depressed the crap out of us first. So you live in D.C., but we have lots of friends, and my daughter and my mother, who live in the upcoming Islamic Republic of New York. So I guess we're going to find out just
I'm
what
an
it
expat.
is like. Yeah. Gonna be great. Gonna be amazing. Can't
Thank you
wait.
for having me.
Thank you for
coming
coming on, and thank you for the work you're doing. It is fantastic.
All right, Danny, what did you think?
So I actually I thought that was really pretty depressing. I have to say, so Chris Caldwell, who was my former colleague when I used to be a journalist back in the 1980s, has done he did the really early work on the marriage between the far left and the Islamists. And you described that Instagram reel that we shared, in which, the Islamists are lined up on one side screaming at the leftists. Unfortunately, though, I think that Islamists have a lot of discipline. They really do. They've got a lot of discipline, and they play the long game. This is what we know about the Muslim Brotherhood. This is what we know about the ideology at the heart of Islamist extremism that fires Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all these groups. And I don't think those confrontations are going to happen in the way that we hope. And that's what we see. We see in Europe the apotheosis of this alliance in these anti-European, anti-Western, anti-feminist, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-modernism, right? Anti-Christian demonstrations that take place in Paris and Manchester and London, and, in front of synagogues, and motivating people to deface Holocaust memorials, which is now happening on a daily basis in Europe, to deface Jewish graves in Jewish cemeteries in Europe. This is this movement, and it's got, as I said about the Democratic Party in America, it's got the big mo. It's got momentum.
And it's not just in Europe, Danny. It's here. You see those same people marching in New York. You see them marching at Harvard. You see them marching in Columbia. You see it. This is coming to us. We've let in so many people who hate America into this country, who have no intention of assimilating, who want to come here to
Hassan
change.
Piker, the Twitch guy who is the rabid anti-Semite, he just went on at length about how much he hates America last week. What?
Why are we letting these people into our country? Europe is in the process of committing suicide. They're just letting their civilization be destroyed by mass immigration of people who hate their culture, hate Western civilization, and want to come in and remake their countries in the image of the countries they came from, which they left because they hated. Which makes it's always there's a really funny video that somebody memed on the internet about like how all these Islamic radicals are unhappy in Saudi Arabia, unhappy in Pakistan, unhappy at that, and so they come to the place that they're happy and want to remake it into Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. It's like, why? I truly don't
Oh,
understand.
I can tell you why, Mark. Because
why?
those groups aren't. Because in Saudi Arabia and in the United Arab Emirates, the Muslim Brotherhood is a designated terrorist organization.
There you
That's
go.
why.
Yeah, and
Because
so
those
they're
guys
using our
know
tolerance
what they're
against
talking
us.
about.
They're using our tolerance again. I'm with Douglas Murray, who said, I'm going to paraphrase him here, who said, I'm done extending tolerance to people who don't extend tolerance back. I'm sorry. And I don't want us to turn. They're like 5-10 years ahead of us on the curve over there in Europe. We want to see what our future looks like. That's it. And we've got to do something about it. And the other thing it's doing, which pisses me off so much, because I actually am very pro-immigration, is that it is absolutely destroying support for legal immigration into this country, which we need for our economy. We need it for our because immigrants who come here and love America make America better. But immigrants who come to America, who come here and hate America, want to destroy it from within, and we got to stop them.
Right.
from
And
doing
you
that.
know what? Let us also add that they create an intolerable environment for Muslims, including observant Muslims who love this country. My girlfriend, and I won't name her, but she's a very, a community leader, speaks at mosques and at synagogues, but she wears hijab. She was brought up in an observant Muslim family in Iraq. And she loves this country, and she loves our values, and she hates Hamas, and she hates Islamist fascism, and she hates leftist fascism. And these people are being harmed because it's not just that immigrants who hate us are making Americans intolerant for legal immigration. It is that there is an environment of intolerance because you cannot distinguish. Because if you don't want, if vast mass of women in hijab come here and are actually married to or hate this country, then this is what happens. You get this environment of intolerance. And I can't understand why there isn't a stronger movement to bring back the melting pot.
Yeah, well, there you have it exactly. I mean, so I don't think it's not
It's not a headdress problem.
But I don't think it's fair to call it a culture of intolerance, because I think we've been so tolerant that people are starting to react.
Right, we're swinging the other way.
We're going the other way, because it's like, well, maybe we need to be a little bit less tolerant for a little while until we figure out, to quote somebody, what the hell is going on, with all this mass immigration from people who hate America. Because, all I know is after October 7th, I've been, we've talked about this, but I've been radicalized over the last few years in this thing, because I woke up on October 7th and I had no idea how many people hated Jews, how many people hated America who were living amongst us, because they were under the rock. And October 7th lifted the rock, and we saw it. And I'm just shocked.
I want the rock to come back down again on all of them.
The rock to come back down and crush them all. I want to get,
Mark has moved the pendulum on the tolerance front.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I think we need to. I'm just shocked at how many people have come into this country who hate America, and it's roiling our politics, because it's happening in New York, and we're with Zoran Mamdani, it's helping, that movement is helping power him to the mayor's seat. A radical Islamist is going to be the mayor of New York City, the city that was attacked 25 years after, on the 25th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. You know who's going to be presiding at the ceremonies in New York?
Well, let's hope it's
Zoran Mamdani.
Well, let's hope instead that it's your favorite grandma killer and pervert Andrew Cuomo instead.
There you go. Excellent. I'm
all right, folks.
Vote
Thanks
for the
for being with
sleazeball.
us.
It's important. Vote for the sleazeball. It's important.
Exactly. You heard it from me and Mark first. Vote for the sleazeball, grandma killer and pervert.
Take care, everybody.
See you next week. Bye.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.